It seems to me that the paper raises a number of important issues, so thanks very much for that are related to this conference, particularly as concerns the relationship between economic growth and prosperity and the sustainability of the democratic order and even democratic institutions, the emergence of right-wing extremist attitudes, and finally the threat that these attitudes and I would say not only these attitudes but related political parties pose in terms of the established socio-political and economic order. But some of these issues seems to me are implicit, or at least I've seen them implicit in the paper, so I'm going to try to flush them out and then to raise some critical points as well. So I'll start with the first issue, the relationship between economic growth and prosperity on the one hand, the sustainability of democratic societies on the other. Because, as you said, in fact, your own words were, if democracy cannot provide prosperity to a majority, then authoritarian attitudes increase. So, to some extent, this provides a direct, very simple answer to the issue of sustained unsustainability. That is to say that policymakers and governments are condemned to providing growth, because the alternative would be even worse. The alternative would be the collapse of the possible collapse of democratic institutions. Effectively, the relentless pursuit of wealth and consumption is non-negotiable, is intractable, precisely because capitalism and the economic consumerism is a faith. But it seems to me that this may apply more appropriately to what you described, to the Germany and Europe in the 1960s to the 1980s. You mentioned the slogan prosperity for all, for instance, but this is not what governments have been pursuing in the last decades. That is to say, they have not continue to pursue a policy of prosperity for as many as possible in order to, let's say, offset the threat of a return to authoritarianism. I'll go back to the question of whether it's a return or what. And, but in fact, policymakers and government have pursued neoliberal policies which have deliberately increase socio-economic disparities, which have deliberately, therefore, engender economic, social, and political deprivation. Because in your other paper that you publish, you seem to say that authoritarian attitudes are on the increase when we are faced with economic decline and economic crisis. As if, you know, when GDP goes down, let's say, then we have an increase of authoritarian attitudes, and governments therefore do everything they can then to go back to a situation of growth. But what I'm saying is that this is misrepresents what has been going on effectively. And also it seems to me that one of the ways governments and policymakers have in fact then dealt with the fact that they no longer actually are delivering prosperity for many, or let alone for all, is the fact that they seem to have shifted from promises of salvation more and more to a relentless cultivation of fear. So the emphasis now is not on narratives of fulfillment so much, but narratives of fear, narratives of threat, which then helps us also to understand the emergence of these anxieties among your respondents in relation to threat and fear. And so this leads me to the second issue, which is about where do these attitudes come from? Where do they originate from, these authoritarian extremist attitudes? Because there seems to be, again, this is implied, and I may have misinterpreted what you were saying, but there seems to be almost a supposition that this kind of authoritarian attitudes were temporarily displaced after 1945, but in a sense, what we are witnessing now is a return of the suppressed. I'm not sure whether that is the case, or I'm not sure even whether that is actually your argument. I'd like to understand it better. But it ignores, in a sense, the political dimension. It ignores the role of political actors, political movements in queuing. And we had in the previous paper this concept of queue controlled. Who is queuing whom? Because we cannot ignore the role of the media, the role of extreme political parties and movements, but even mainstream parties in influencing the way that people think and their attitudes. So if we take, for example, your figures, it was clear that attitudes in terms of a return, a belief that there should be an authoritarian state, a return to an authoritarian state in Germany, were not so relevant. What was mainly relevant was chauvinism, attitudes of chauvinism, and attitudes of anti-immigrants and anti-immigration. Now, in this sense, we cannot decouple these attitudes from the fact that we know very well that the mainstream discourse, not just the discourse of extreme populist parties, but even mainstream discourse, has taken on as very much promoted this kind of attitudes. And so this raises, for me, a third issue, which is the issue, how antagonistic are these kind of attitudes, and how antagonistic are actually these movements, extreme right movements and parties? Because again, this seems to be implied in your paper, that these authoritarian attitudes are very threatening. They constitute a very serious threat to the democratic order. Now, again, I may have misinterpreted that. But is that the case? One of the questions is, how much of a threat are they? How much of a kind of structural, of a project of structural transformation, however undesirable, do these movements and parties really pose? And it seems to me that they are subordinated, actually, to the neoliberal hegemonic order, not least because, as you yourself in your paper pointed out, they tend to be concerned primarily with cultural issues. So I want to quote here from Bornshire, who has argued, and I quote, and I'm nearly finished, "The processes of globalization and European integration have resulted in a diminished autonomy of economic and social policy making at the national level, and have thereby contributed to a weakening of the saliency of economic as opposed to cultural conflicts." So because this the threat seems to be mainly a cultural threat, and this is promoted, as I said, by policymakers and governments. Then it seems to me that the emphasis then is on the consequences of neoliberalism rather than the causes of neoliberalism. And I could say a lot more about this, but I haven't got time. We can discuss about this. But so these extremist attitudes, these extremist movements and parties apparently provide an antagonistic stance to neoliberalism, not effectively are subordinated to it.
Thank you very much. Olivier,
in the 50s, the value for each of the members of society is transported directly to them. Yeah? Here is a gute Botschaft, here is a good message. You can buy all you can see, and what you miss now, you will buy later on. The car, good meals, nice clothing and so on. Today, things changed. You are completely right, but I think the main point is the same, that there is something promised by the economy and it is promised by neoliberals, and that the society must grow, because then for all members of this market society, the possibility grow too. It's an it's a contrafactual slogan, but it's an implicated one. And I think if you look at the reaction to new technique of Apple, for example, that people want to buy this new iPad or this new iPhone, you can see that they try to participate a little bit of this economical development and of the new techniques, and they are satisfied by this small part. They could participate because it's something like in former times the communion. In this small moment, something of that what will come, you could have, not only for a small moment, but there's a promise in this technique that all the insufficiency of the body will go away. If you have an iPad, you don't have to miss. I happened to miss my wife yesterday evening because I have Skype. I get the illusion that I am by her and could be by you. There's an omnipresent narcissistic fantasy which is offered. It's not completely, but if you read in the last articles in Science, that we are not, that scientists are not now able to indicate memories by stimulation techniques of deep brain stimulation, then you get an idea of what the development should be, and the people realize that, and they hear the good message all the time. One day the interface between the machine and the human being would be possible to give away all the problems you have with this body, which will die one day. We will die one day. We have pain all the time. We live, and it will grow all the time, and so on. And one day there will be a solution. Not now, but with this technique you will see it's possible one day. And we are working on it, and for this working on it, we have to change our system into a complete market society. And that's what I think what happens. And that's the reason why it's nearly impossible to act against growing market society, because there is a religious promise. And we try to find indication for that, but you are right, it's a little bit more, it's only a little hint of it in this. It's not completely plausible in all points, but I think you could see here what Detlef Clausen, German sociologist working about antisemitism since years, called an antisemitism as an Alltagsreligion. Yeah, it's something what a religion for every day. It's something what grow up if other things go down. It's what Freud called die Wut auf diejenigen, die es besser wissen. The anger of the anger
towards those who know better.
Who know better that the Messiah didn't come, and they know it, and that's something what happens now too. We are living in a messianic society with a millennium expectation, and it's fulfilled in under the authority of man. And if you can see that this development will fail, then the anti-democratic attitudes grow up, because then the something like enlightenment lost legitimization. And why should people control themselves That's the danger about the society who promise something, and if you could see that there is no solution of the problems, then the angel grow up and take part.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
No, it's a complex argument you're making. Ingeful, I'd like to defer to your judgment. We're a little late starting. We could have a little time. We've had no time for the floor to ask questions. I think that would be appropriate if anyone has any.
10 minutes or something.
Right. So I open it out to the floor. Any questions? Okay, so we'll just start because you haven't asked it. Yeah. Is that okay? Please. Again, if you could introduce yourself and your.
My name's Mike Hannis. I'm currently at Birkbeck, starting at Bath's Bar after Christmas, so it's great to meet some people here. Firstly, I wonder if you could clarify, I thought I heard you say that a top-down environmental policy would mean dictatorship. I'm sure that's not what you said. I'll be perhaps you could clear that up. Maybe it is what you said. But secondly, I was sort of listening a bit for the maybe I missed it. What the actual connection that you're positing between the perceptions of the ecological threat and the sort of xenophobia world, and how they're kind of connected. It called to mind I've worked a little bit with some people from within psychoanalysis who have this whole sort of thesis about climate change denial sort of emerging from this kind of disavowal perspective, where people kind of split off the bit that they can't really deal with, and I wonder maybe there's something similar is happening with people in a multicultural society, that they just want to split off the fact that is happening. And could that sort of account for some of this correlation?
If it's okay, I'd like to take the second question now as well, and then we yeah.
Someone else surely must have a question.
Apparently not. Please go ahead.
Again, thank you very much. A recommendation, if you're looking for another country to look at and it's got better weather, is Australia, which has gone, that's where I'm from, the last 20 years, enormous prosperity, mostly because we're selling raw materials to China. And we also have a historical thing that we admit but can't admit, which is that we stole the land from the Aboriginal people. And there's the same brittleness that you describe there. So, and as I said, the weather's great, much better than Leipzig or Bath. And two other things is, it occurs to me that this identity creation around possession of the iPad or the latest clothes is extraordinarily brittle. There is no... In times of trouble, at least the Catholic Church gave you a set of rituals that could comfort you with a sense of an afterlife. But capitalism does not offer you that. If you are a flawed consumer, as Zygmunt Bauman says, you're left just to die in the corner. So I wonder if there's further work to be done on what happens to the flawed consumers and how they cope with that. And thirdly, a book, Carbon Democracy by Timothy Mitchell, looking at how democratic politics and fossil fuel infrastructure have grown together since the end of the 19th century through the 20th century. It's a fascinating book.
I have to ask the title later on because I didn't understand. Okay, thank you very much for the question. I would say, okay, I wouldn't say that to organize society top-down necessarily means that we have a dictatorship, but it's legitimized, I would say, anti-democratic governance. That's a problem because we are looking for a solution of the great problem of pollution. And we could see since 30 years that we lay the finger in the wound, if this metaphor goes also in English. And nothing happened, nothing changed. We are right, and nothing changed. And the question is why. And we can't say, okay, we don't have time to ask the question and to find our answer. We need a direct action. Let's go to an elite, allied government, because we know how to work. But the problem is that democracy means there are different interests, and there must be a process of a process to find the right way of to realize the most interests of the most people. And if you set one group in power to then it's anti-democratic. It's, I would say, definitely. And we lost the legitimization. Maybe we are able to rescue the nature, whatever it is, but we lost democracy. And the problem is that we couldn't understand what the meaning of nature is. Thinking nature, I would translate an idea of Adorno and Horkheimer, das Eingedenken der Natur. Thinking nature means also to realize that our development of human being is not so far away from nature. So it's not only the outside, it's also the inside. And what seems to be the opposite of nature, also our thinking, is nature. And that means it's a kind of violence against the objects around. To say, to identify things is violence. And we have to think about our process of enlightenment before we could deal with the disaster of environment pollution. That's what I would argue for. And the funny thing of anti-immigrant positions in Germany and in the group discussion is that the reasons for this hatred against immigrants are the same as against Jewish people. They have money, houses, luck without work. They're all the day hanging around, doing nothing. I'm working all the time. They are doing nothing. They are lazy people, but they do what they want all the time. They get money from the governments all the time. They have big cars. I have no car. They have big cars. They have houses, and they get Viagra from the health insurance system for free. Yeah? They have the sexuality, the fulfilled sexuality. That's a complete and well-known projection. And it's not only what would you say? It's not only crazy. Yeah, you have to realize in this motives. What is a motive? You have to realize from this what they saw in the other. What are the conditions under which this projection grow up? And that means they have they have all what I have to miss means you get an idea of the needs of the people and what they have been promised and what is not fulfilled. And in this relation you get an idea, what I say, what is in the background of the psychodynamic process. And yeah, that's maybe one answer to this idea of what is psychoanalytical thinking about this anti-immigrant position.
Okay, well, it's 1:10. I'm afraid we're going to be called for lunch, so I'd like to thank you again very much.
Thank
I'm
you
sorry we
for
ran out of time, but thank you again.